quite a while, mainly from events like this one, Bermon Painter, who has been speaking at these events for over a decade. So, I mean, I think we're both kind of like old-timers here, yeah. But more than that, he's been making stuff on the web, I'm going to say almost as long as I have, but maybe the same, I don't know. I just have more gray hair, or you hide it better. I'm not sure which.
Some gray hair and the curls.
Yeah. I know, I can't compete with that. That's why I keep it cut really short. But anyway, you really need to find him after the conference. Talk about root beer. That's going to get him wound up like you would not believe. A warm welcome all the way from North Carolina, Bermon. Thanks for coming.
Jason, appreciate it. Well, hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. Like Jason said, I've been speaking at these events before it was FITC, and they were hosting these things in Boston, technically outside of Boston, which was always fun. Today we're going to talk about next-gen personalized and localized experiences. It is nothing new per se, but it may be new to some of you as the technologies have shifted. The way that we are designing and developing modern experiences across multiple channels, we have a lot more tools in the toolbox that we can start to use. So we're going to take a trip a little bit back, probably to the 90s, 80s, something like that. In the early days of the web, so it was a simpler time, right? It was GeoCities, guest books, web rings for those that were around in those times. And personalization in the late 90s really meant one thing: JavaScript pop-ups. That's how we did it. It was great. You know the ones that I'm talking about, hopefully. You agree with a pop-up that just says, well, hey, what's your name? You type that bad boy in, and you click submit, and then sort of like magic, or what felt like magic a long time ago, you get, well, hello, Bermon. Welcome to Web Unleashed. So we can insert people's names on the website. It seems trivial and almost kind of useless based off of what we can do today. If we go to the other extreme on personalization, it's less civilized, right? Everything's powered by algorithms, and they track everything that you do online, but they're not very intelligent. So a while back, I was searching for a new toilet seat. You know, the nice soft close seats that don't slam whenever you close them down. So I found one, bought it on Amazon, shipped it, installed it. That was it. I was done, or so I thought. So apparently, Amazon's algorithm was just so convinced that I really liked toilet seats that that's all that I saw for weeks. Toilet seat recommendations, toilet seats in my socials, toilet seats in search, soft close, heated, the nice bidets that squirt warm water at your bum, which are really nice. I mean, I appreciate a good toilet seat, but I only have so many toilets. So it was like the algorithm was saying, you know, hey, Bermon, I see that you're really into toilet seats. Why not buy a few more? Now, it's funny, I think, for us from a technology standpoint, because the algorithms get it wrong, and they get it wrong a lot. And we kind of know why. Now, in my case, it feels like they're trying to make me the king of toilet seats, but that's not what I want to try and do with my life. So when we think of personalization and its close cousin, localization, it's more important than ever that we're creating meaningful digital experiences. But there's a fine line between making content relevant and then making content creepy. And various toilet seats are a little bit creepy. Now, in my day-to-day work, I work for a global consultancy called Slalom, and we have the opportunity to work with a lot of companies across a lot of sectors in a lot of different countries. And what I enjoy about consulting is the constant change. It's a different team, a different company, a different industry, a different challenge, almost every project, and it keeps me from getting bored. Right now, one of my teams is in the middle of a large platform modernization for a global financial services company, and essentially they operate in about 200 countries. They have about 400,000 physical locations, and the content needs to be delivered in 20 plus languages. So it's a big, meaty, fun project to work on. The client's great, they're super reasonable, and the team's having a blast. Now, while it may sound a little bit daunting, the technology that we're using today versus 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago has changed dramatically. And the speed in which innovations are coming into some of these platforms is also advancing faster than we can keep up, and we adapt pretty quickly as consultants. So for this particular client, we're leveraging Contentful for a headless CMS. We're using Ninetailed, which was just acquired by Contentful, for personalization. This isn't an ad, I promise. But they're really fun platforms that we enjoy working with. There's a handful of other ones mixed in there. We're using Netlify for serverless deployment, who are also a sponsor. And then, like any good front-end developer, we're doubling down on design systems and component-based designs, using Storybook to house a lot of those components at sort of an atomic molecular level, patterns, templates, etc. And then we're sort of building all of that in Next.js because it plays really nicely with this ecosystem and gives us a lot of flexibility in how we're trying to tackle some of this particular client's and various other clients' challenges. So let's talk about some goodies. Now, one thing to take away from this is the future of digital experiences isn't just about predicting how many toilet seats you might need from day to day. It's more about meeting people where they are. It's about meeting them in the language in which they speak, and then serving the content that they actually want. I don't actually want a bunch of toilet seats. I may want some things that are ancillary to that, or I want something completely different. Now, if you can nail that and nail it well, you're not just personalizing experiences for end users, for consumers. You're connecting with the information that they find valuable, and I think that's an important nuance in what we're trying to do. Now, a few industry examples just to kind of set the stage, and then we're going to go into some code examples on how all of this sort of fits together. So personalization and localization, just as a concept, has come a really long way, from simply greeting users through the pop-up to dynamically adapting the experience to their context, to the device, and to what they're looking for. It's about preferences and behaviors and serving them an experience in real time that adapts with their needs. So let's look at how this plays across a few different industries. So one of my preferred industries to support is life sciences and healthcare, because you're helping real people with real challenges. Whether it's from cancer research to diabetics to you name it, personalized health content based off of their medical history, their browsing behavior, the type of advice that they're getting from their practitioners, the professionals that are guiding them on their health care, becomes important as they're trying to navigate what they need to be doing from both a medication and a behaviors and an activity standpoint to improve their health. In financial services, we also do a lot in this space. It's more about helping big companies make more money. It's kind of what it feels like. But we do it, and in some cases it's about real-time investment. In some cases it's about transferring money from one place to the next, and helping both internal teams like wealth managers and then end users understand more about how they can manage their finances is important. And then retail. So if we were supporting Amazon, we would help them do something very different than what they're doing from a recommendation standpoint, because it's sort of a dumb algorithm in some cases. So, for example, if somebody is searching for something for winter jackets in Toronto, like for me, for example, I'm not really prepped for winter. It's kind of chilly here. I kind of dig it. I did bring a jacket. It's a very light jacket, so I'm not going to be meandering around too much at night. But they may recommend, I might need a thicker jacket if I'm coming to Toronto. Or if I'm going to California, they might recommend sunglasses or a surfboard, who knows. And then some best practices before we dig into some of the code. One of the most important things, I think, is to start with the data, but respect privacy. That's a challenging thing sometimes, depending on the industry and the company and the leadership. We prefer to always respect users' privacy and not try and do underhanded things with people's data. Bad things can happen, especially if you're caught. Even worse if you're not caught and you continue to do it. Also, AI is a thing, and I'm always hesitant to mention because it feels very buzzwordy. But there are some very practical things that you can do with AI, and we'll talk about some examples here shortly, that helps with content adaptation, making sure that we're generating and serving relevant content based off the data that we have, not just letting an algorithm run amok. And then when we think of languages and translations, it's more than just simply translations from a localization perspective. It's about cultural adaptation in how we're presenting these experiences on the web. Visuals, offers, references, they need to resonate with the regions and the locales that we're supporting. And then when we're thinking about implementation, it's multi-tiered, right? It's much more than just capturing their name and showing that on the screen. There are different levels. There are macro personalizations that are more regional based, micro that are more individual based, and then there's sort of in between where we're taking personas and adapting those to segments that we can put in a personalization platform like Ninetailed to generate more relevant experiences for a broader audience, and then narrow that down as we need to specific individuals. And then I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir on this one. Testing and iterating often is also important. It is never a good idea to just fire things at the wall, hope something sticks. You want to test and validate and then double down where initiatives around personalization actually drive value and drive a better customer experience. And then last here, and one of the things that we'll focus on a bit is composability in the way that we combine these platforms together. It's about modular content and modularizing that content so that we can scale effectively across product lines and services and regions and locales, languages, etc. And then one last thing to keep in mind is around value drivers. What do businesses actually care about? One is the thing that we hear a lot all the time across all industries that we support, is that the executives are really trying to increase top of the funnel customer conversion. What that means is they want to be able to get people into the top of their conversion funnel, target those users with relevant content in their language, in their region, to increase the likelihood that they're going to engage with the brand. The second thing that we hear a lot across industries is that they're trying to improve the relevance of the experience, that they care about serving people information that they need. So it keeps them interested and engaged and leads to higher conversion rates and just interaction in the products or services that they're either buying or using. And then boosting conversion rates is kind of a gimme. Most of us either work with or work for businesses, and their goal is to make money. So optimizing conversion rates helps drive revenue at the end of the day. And then sort of an adjacent to that, we're trying to decrease bounce rates as best as we can, keep people on the site or in the app. And then we also want to expand the number of services that customers typically engage with. Now, personalization and localization aren't just nice to have, especially in the modern digital experiences that we're creating, that there is a high consumer expectation. So they're really the baseline nowadays. The brands that win, that will be the brands that make every user feel like the experience was built just for them, no matter where they are in the world and what device they access the services from. Now, I can see a few faces. You might be asking yourselves, why is Bermon talking about all of these high-level concepts? Because this is Web Unleashed. It's the ultimate front-end developer conference. Where's the code? We're getting there. The reason that I bring this up, especially for this audience, is it's a tough market out there. I know it is in the US, it is in Canada as well, where there's a lot going on. There's still a lot of layoffs in the tech sector. Some of you may be looking for jobs. It's a hard environment. The reality with these layoffs is it's typically not your manager or your manager's manager or your manager's manager's manager that's making these decisions. It's some individual somewhere higher up in the food chain at the executive level, just sort of axing people to reduce costs in a lot of cases. So as a software engineer, front-end developer, designer, you name it, the best way to make yourselves indispensable at an organization is to be tightly coupled to work that the executives deem valuable. The second most important thing that you can do there is to begin to use language that the executives use, that they frankly don't care about Contentful or Next.js or performance or design systems. They care about the bottom line. And the more that you're able to adapt the technical language that you use to describe what you do and the value that it provides to the language that executives and business leaders use, you're going to be their go-to. They will come to you because you're speaking the same language. They will never learn the technical jargon that we know, so we have to learn theirs. So now let's talk code. Okay, let's dig into this a little bit. I'll sort of use this as the baseline for the examples that I'm going to share. So like I said, it's a big global financial service organization, lots of locations, lots of countries. They have quite a few digital channels and digital properties that they're trying to rein in through a platform modernization. So at a high level, this is sort of what it starts to look like. We're using Contentful's platform as the core CMS. That's where we have structured content. Typically, we'll work pretty heavily with an information architect to make sure that all of this makes sense. We'll work with marketing, brand, content strategists to also make sure that the content's being presented at an ideal level. And then adjacent to that, we're also using Contentful Studio. Contentful Studio is a new product that Contentful launched maybe about a year ago. One of the things that we really like about it is think of it like a low-code, no-code UI builder for the marketing teams, the product teams, the design teams, with some very healthy constraints. Contentful Studio has 0 opinions. There is nothing that goes in there that we don't build. So what it allows us to do is we can take our nice, responsive, semantic, accessible, performant Next.js components or Angular components, or whatever language you use, put those into Storybook, as one should, or another design system platform, wrap those in some SDK goodness from Studio, and then surface those into the editor experience. So that allows the marketers to drag our nicely developed components to build pages, map those to structured content from Contentful, and they can do a lot of the build work so that we're not stuck doing tedious updates. It is a very magical thing that we see when teams can do this. And then we also layer on Ninetailed. So Ninetailed is a personalization platform. And what that allows us to do is to create segmentation and provide relevance to the structured content that we're displaying to users. And then Netlify is the serverless deployment platform that we use. It plays very nicely with Astro, with Next.js, and we have a ton of options to optimize how we're rendering pages so that when a user clicks on a page, it's relevant and it's fast. And we'll dig into those in detail shortly. So think of this as sort of like a well-orchestrated concert where each instrument plays their part, but together they create something truly spectacular that we can use. If we do sort of a double click down, this is more of a technical architecture detail where we have what we call the composable ecosystem, where obviously you get the CMS. If you're commerce, there's e-commerce that you can plug in, authentication, insights, search. You can do the visual editor like Contentful Studio, layer on personalization, CRM, CDPs, you name it. There's a bunch of platforms that fit so nicely in this ecosystem that are cloud first and API first, where as a front-end developer, we don't really have to be back-end engineers. We don't have to become API developers or focus on DevOps. We're essentially configuring the platforms, or somebody else is configuring the platforms, and we're simply ingesting APIs, and we can do that all day long and putting those in the experience. There are a few levels. There's what I would call like really basic personalization. This is where content changes just based off of data that we have. Their location, the source they're coming from, or language preferences. It's very easy. It allows us to sort of plug and play different sections of content as we need to. As we get more complex, we have more complex personalization, where we can actually generate and build full pages on the fly based off the user visiting the site. This is where the orchestration and the composable architectures really shine. So one of the things that we're doing for this particular client is we've plugged in AWS Bedrock, which is essentially Amazon's version of ChatGPT or OpenAI, that we can train on tone and voice guidelines, brand guidelines, you name it, and then allow the end users to generate pages on the fly, translate pages, do what they need to do. We can also define a glossary. And then from a Next.js and a Netlify standpoint, we can generate a page 100 times or 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times, and it's 1,000,000 unique pages for each of those visitors. So there's a lot of power there in the way that we're able to give them relevance. The holy grail, which is hard for any company, is using what we call a customer data platform. We're actually ingesting relevant customer data for an authenticated user to make those personal experience even more personalized. All right, so let's talk about code. So at a high level, typically what we'll do, there's a level of middleware that we'll create that detects really basic attributes like location, referral source, headers, any query parameters that we're getting from like a Google search. This middleware essentially intercepts those requests, identifies the attributes that we need to hook into, and then sets custom headers that we can use later to serve some of the personalized content. Once we get into some of the server-side logic, we can set up a basic page in Next.js that uses the personalization data. It connects with the Contentful and like the Ninetailed SDKs so that we can use the personalization data that we're configuring from the middleware and then serve the content. So in this example, we're essentially just using get server-side props. And that runs on the server, typically in Netlify, for every request. So it fetches the personalization data on Ninetailed based off of their location or the source. It pre-renders the page and then serves that pretty darn quickly. The next step down is we can then use that data to display personalized information. So in this case, we're essentially replicating the, hey Bermon, welcome to Web Unleashed. It's basically automated version of what that JavaScript pop-up used to be. And there's a lot of power in doing this around images, product placement, promotions. If I'm in a specific region and that region has specific promotions or services that other locations don't, we can generate that content so we don't have to build a bunch of separate pages, sort of like hard coding that information in. And then caching. Caching is really important because essentially we're sort of serving static pages at the end of the day. So one of the things that we can do through Next.js that works really well with Netlify is just using basic incremental static regeneration. So we have an instance with this particular client where they have market rates for money transfers. Those rates don't change quickly, but they change often enough that that needs to stay fresh. So what we can do, instead of using static site generation, we can use ISR for pages that don't really need real-time updates, but need to be updated frequently enough. So the pages are generated at build time, but then updates happen on whatever timing you give it. So in this example, we are setting a revalidate key and value to 60 seconds, essentially. So on the server, it's going to regenerate this page every 60 seconds. It'll cache that so that it's still crazy fast for the users and it's still relevant updated data. So it's sort of this balance between speed and freshness of the content that you're getting. And then dynamic routes. So we have a scenario where there are 200 country pages. Each of those pages need to be culturally relevant. They need to be localized. And we need to be able to, at a minimum, only show the products and services that are available in those countries. Sometimes the primary is they're going to a physical location to send and receive money transfers. In other countries, they can do it online, so everything is virtual. So this allows us to essentially set up our template, set up our personalization, set up our business rules, and then generate 200 pages with structured content from Contentful that can still be managed through Contentful Studio and leverages some of the logic that we get through Ninetailed. And then between Next.js and Netlify, it just kind of runs. So if we add something new, it's going to apply that to 200 pages. But we've only created one template to do all that work, which is a stark contrast to what the current marketing team does today, is they have 200 pages, and when there's a copy change, they make it 200 times. Then they have to retranslate all of those pages. It's just not efficient, so this gives them a lot of speed. So rendering options, there are a few options. There's SSG, right, static site generation. This is typically what we would use for any marketing site. We use get static props in Next.js, and it's just going to spit out HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It is really secure, really fast. We also have the option to go with SSR. It feels like we're going back in time about 10, 15 years to the PHP days, which is a good thing, in my opinion. SPAs were probably a bad idea. So we can do server-side rendering, which essentially does all of this on the server. We use this when we need to either drive personalization or we have more dynamic content that needs to be rendered on request. So we use get server-side props to make this happen. And then we have what we call incremental static generation, which is what we talked about before. It's kind of like this mixture between real-time content updates and then static site generation for performance. So we use get static props, and then we fetch the content, but we use the revalidate flag in there to update the cache on whatever time frame we deem is appropriate for the dynamic content. And then one of the really interesting things that we can do with Next.js, and Netlify really thrives in this space, is we can do partial page rendering for complex scenarios. So we can combine all of that together. Okay, we are coming up close to time. One thing to important is caching. So all of this is essentially static. Managing the cache is an important thing. Used to be hard. Now it kind of isn't. So anytime somebody mashes the publish button in Contentful, it triggers page renders, invalidates the old cache, sets a new cache. It's kind of that simple. Okay, and then edge functions. One last thing to be aware of is they let us run custom logic. So when we're doing highly personalized experiences, we tap into Netlify's edge functions to push this to the edge as fast as we can so that the pages are rendered really quick. 5 things to remember. Composable architectures are key. So when we're thinking of delivering next-gen personalized, localized experiences, it goes well beyond just translations. It's about creating contextually and culturally relevant content using flexible and composable architectures. And we can leverage edge computing to bring the content closer to users by using a mix of the various rendering strategies, whether it's SSG, ISR, SSR, so we can optimize for performance. And then data-driven approaches are really what enable the delivery of these really unique, contextually relevant experiences based on user context. So I'm Bermon Painter. I hold open office hours every Friday morning for 7 to 9. For those of you that are here on the East Coast, feel free to hop in. I love chatting about this stuff. You can also just email me if you want to. And then I'm still on social media, but not as much anymore. I'm very easy to track down. There are 2 Bermons in the world. One's my father, but I have better SEO. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Bermon. Excellent as always. We invite you to
All
have
right.
a seat, and we'll have a little bit of Q&A. I'm just going to say now, if y'all don't start getting your questions in, I am going to monopolize this town this time because my colleague Waldemar and I are dealing with a lot of this stuff all the time. So let me ask, because I was looking a second ago and nobody had any other questions in, so I'm taking the first slot.
All right.
Oh, I am so sorry. I'm not good at remembering to tell you that. fitc.ca/ask, and that's for all of the talks here today. So I beg your pardon. If you have a question, why don't you just ask it?
Okay, so I have a question. A lot of this is a personalization localization talk. In the code you showed, you have instances where you simply get personalization data.
Mm-hmm.
And then also at the start of your talk, you mentioned how you approach things with a stance of privacy.
I just want to sort of restate this for people who are on the stream that might not have heard that. The question is balancing personalization data and the need to be respectful with privacy to reinforce that with senior leadership in your organization. Is that a fair characterization? Okay.
That's a great question, and it comes up so much with executives. Because if they're a publicly traded company, stock price is what drives decisions, and it's very short-sighted in a lot of cases. If they're private, there's a bit more flexibility, and they're focused a lot more on revenue. We use the same tactic that we use for something like accessibility, and we talk about risks, and we talk about potential litigation. That's the language that will typically get executives' ears to perk up because they're risk averse and they don't want to get sued. So one of the things that we have to get better at on our team, and we have to learn, is we have to learn some of we have to understand GDPR, for example, if we're doing something in the UK. So we have to know what the laws are, so that we can articulate why we are or aren't making certain recommendations. And then I think it was Mike Montero that had some really good comments maybe a number of years ago, is like, as a designer or as a developer, nobody can force you to do something that could be illegal or wrong or could violate somebody's privacy. Now, you might lose your job over it, but again, that goes back to risk and litigation. So every time that comes up with an executive where it's mostly, we should be able to do this, or I want you to do this, if we know that it goes against policies at a country, state level, or if it's against the law, or if it could open us up to litigation, or open them up to litigation because we're consultants, which could also open us up to litigation. We have a very candid conversation at a business level on, well, if we do this, these are the potential consequences, these are the potential costs. I have in my back pocket a number of lawsuits and the price tags that are tens of millions of dollars where companies have violated accessibility or privacy or you name it. And that typically helps us avoid having to do something that doesn't feel right or is absolutely not right from a privacy standpoint. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Awesome. Thank you.
It actually reminds me of something else that Mike Montero said in Design as a Job, which is if you have not sold your leadership or your team on this design solution or against a different design solution, you're not done with your job yet. That is part of our role, is to understand in terms that will relate to the stakeholders to whom we are communicating the importance of these decisions, whether it's accessibility or anything else, and having those things in your back pocket, that data that supports your decision to do or not do is critical. And so especially as you advance in your career, that is the hallmark of a senior, a staff, a principal, is the familiarity and the convincingness that you can bring to that conversation to articulate those things in a really meaningful way. Thank you. I hope you don't mind the addition on that.
No worries.
But so coming back, I wanted to ask, there's a few questions that have kind of flowed together. I had started off asking about, in this scenario, if you have millions of active users that are coming in who are logged in and you're trying to do stuff at this scale, is the caching working only on the whole page or on the part of the page? And that kind of ties into some other questions from Kevin and from Richard around how static can static be, and are you caching 20 million versions of a page, or like how does that work in this scenario?
That's a really good question. In the most simple scenarios where we're using personalization, whether it's SSR or SSG, you're essentially caching the full page because they don't need to change often. And then if I'm an authenticated user, as an example, and I'm clicking from page to page and that data is changing, we're essentially rendering the page on the server and then serving and caching that page to the end user. And that happens pretty frequently, and it's fast. That's one of the reasons why we prefer to use something like a Netlify versus trying to build everything like that within like an AWS or GCP, a Google Cloud. Now, because you can definitely build that infrastructure on your own, but then you have to maintain all of that infrastructure. So Netlify is, like, at least in my opinion, the appropriate level of abstraction to manage the caching and the performance. And I hate to say it this way, but we kind of don't have to worry about how many pages are sort of floating around in cached, because we know the system, for the most part, will always invalidate and then cache new pages as users or segments or changes happen with the code itself. What was the second part of that question?
Well, I think you've kind of answered a lot of that, but I think the other related question from Richard was so if we're thinking about this stack of where we're creating stuff, you're sort of assembling it, and that's being cached in Netlify. There is, sort of a CDN outside of that. There are various sizes of bills that are coming in from these services. So, I mean, have you found in terms of like where it's expensive, like massive compute time, with AWS versus really cheap caching at a CDN layer, what's it like?
Yeah.
Like when you're trying to figure out where the cost should go and where it's going to be most efficient.
Okay, I got a good question. One of the challenges and the gotchas that people will have is in how they're configuring Next.js to render and deploy to Netlify. If you set it up with your CI/CD processes where somebody makes a change in Contentful or you make a change in your code and you're re-rendering the entire site and then deploying and caching the entire site every time a change happens, then your cloud costs are just going to skyrocket. If you're not paying attention, that's what it'll do. So you have to be very intentional with your infrastructure, DevOps, development teams to make sure that when you're configuring pages, templates, routes, slugs, etc. in Next.js, you're being very specific around how you want those pages to render. It'll default to SSG, which isn't necessarily bad, but you need to be explicit and have a strategy around how you want to manage that. And then the next layer of that is you are layering on personalization, or you do have dynamic content that's coming from other APIs. You'll also want to be very intentional around how you're configuring those pages, and then what your caching strategy looks like. If you do it well, then you're typically only sending pages to the edge as you need to, and it's either a full page at a time or partial renders at a time that keeps those costs pretty low and keeps your speed high.
Great, thank you. I hope, I'm trying to remember if it was, it was Richard's question. I know that you can't exactly get to a bill amount, but I think that was really helpful in kind of figuring out where it's expensive and where it's more efficient.
So from a cost standpoint, right? Netlify has a flat cost. It'll look at your average traffic, essentially, and then give you a price off of that. And you can put as many sites as you want on Netlify, so it's not a per site license. If you have 100 sites and they all fit within your traffic thresholds, you can just kind of go at it. And then it scales really well for traffic, highs and lows, but the cost is kind of the same unless you hit your bandwidth limits, and you'll know well beforehand if that's going to happen.
That's great. I'm going to jump off another question from Kevin. He was talking about modularizing content. Now, we at Chewy, we kind of struggle with that as well when we're trying to have our team build out these landing pages and that sort of thing where we want to have that personalized content plugged in. I'm curious, with the studio piece, are they able to really preview the whole page? Are they working in tiny pieces? Like, how are they? What's their workflow like to start to put these things together?
So there's two sides to it. There's the content entry, and the content is componentized. Like, it feels very closely aligned to how we think of like atomic and molecular components in a design system. It's kind of the same thing for content. Like at a basic level, if you think of a content section, in a lot of cases it's like an image, a title, maybe a subtitle, some descriptions, and some calls to actions. In other cases, you have a content entry for things like FAQs or products, where you have a data structure that's the same for every product. So when we put those into Studio, the way that it works is you essentially, it almost feels kind of like Figma, but a very constrained version of Figma, where we source, in most cases, either atomic level components like buttons, headers, body text, or we have sort of like molecular level components that are a bit more complex, where we need to have a specific layout that adapts, but we don't really go higher than that in Studio. So that allows the marketing to essentially, they drag in a section, they drag in a container, they drag in columns, and then they can start to drag in the atomic or the molecular level UI elements to build that specific section of the site. The content entry happens separately. So in the Studio UI, I can essentially go into the right sidebar and query the content, the structured content, and then map that content to any of those elements on the page. So if I don't need all of it, and I just need portions of it, you can do that mapping on your own. It makes it really fast. So, as an example, one of our marketers, they built out the full homepage in like a couple hours with everything on it, plus localization. So it goes very quickly because there are enough constraints that can move fast. And if they need to handle things like layout or change different heading sizes or colors, we bubble up the tokens in the interface. So they can only select the design tokens that exist and the values that exist in the design system in Studio.
Interesting. I probably could spend the rest of the day talking to you about that, but I think we're going to have to cut it off because we are heading into a break. Bermon, this has been fantastic as always.
Thank you.
I don't know, Leo, I think this may have been the best talk I've heard from him so far, so I think we're keeping the bar high.
I appreciate that. Thanks, everybody.